From Sport Unlocked, the week in sports news. This week with Martyn Ziegler from The Times, Tariq Panja from The New York Times and Graham Dunbar from The Associated Press.
Zeeks, what the devil are you doing in Istanbul? I think you're sitting in front of a glamorous advert there at the airport, it looks like. What are you doing there, Zeeks?
Yeah, just been here the last 2 days. It's the Champions League draw, Europa League draw, and a host of sort of UEFA meetings, club competitions committee, and also the European Club Association board, which has been talking about things such as where the money is all going to go once this new Champions League comes in 2024.
And where is that money going? Did you get any clear idea? Because that's the next big fight. We've got the new tournament, as you mentioned, from 24, the new format. Where is this money going? Have you got any ideas while you've been there?
Well, I think it's like battle lines drawn. Everyone is competing for their own interests. So if you speak to somebody from one club, they obviously, the bigger the club, the bigger the share they want. If you're a smaller club, then they want more equitable shares between, for example, the Europa League getting a bigger slice compared to the Champions League, and so on. So I just think it's going to be a bit of a sort of a battle, really, and it's interesting to see who comes out on top. It's just whether the Super League collapse has shifted things away from the big clubs somewhat. We'll be speaking to Akihiro Lati later. He's the chief executive of HJK Helsinki and vice chairman of the ECA, and sits on UEFA's club competitions committee. So he's got some interesting thoughts too. But what do you think, Graham? You know, something you followed closely, the money. Where do you think this is going to end up? And has the Super League made a big difference?
Well, the Super League gave an opportunity for the ECA to remake itself a little and change the democratic structure, and give the lower tier clubs like Aki's club in Helsinki more of a say. I'm not sure that happened. I'm not sure that opportunity was taken. Now they will talk about solidarity. Some clubs, the European leagues especially, talk about more solidarity payments. And a few €100 million are paid each year from Champions League revenues in solidarity, but really they're pennies on the pound when you think how much a lower mid-table Premier League club will get compared to €100 million that the big four, the big six will be getting. So more solidarity will be good. Can it close the wealth gap? Can it promote competitive balance?
Talking about money, we have to be clear what we're talking about here as well. It's going to be the biggest purse in European football history, right? This new TV contract that they're negotiating. Martin, we've both written about it quite a lot. It's a lot more, or certainly more significant than the current one, right?
Yeah, not quite as big as I thought UEFA hoped was going to happen. I think a year ago they were talking about, they get a 40% uplift. I think it's going to be more like 20, 25 by the time all the deals are done. But still, yeah, huge amount of money, €4.5 billion a year. And it's how you slice and dice that. Do the big clubs, obviously, they drive the interest. Should they get more of the lion's share? I think most people interested in competitive balance would think probably not. But I mean, that's what led to the Super League, isn't it? So there's a sort of tightrope for UEFA to walk.
Graham, do you think UEFA is actually interested in competitive balance, though? You've written about this in April, the new FFP, for example. Is competitive balance that important?
Well, are they interested, or what can they actually do in the realpolitik of the situation? How much can they actually achieve? I mean, this has been the tension between the UEFA and the clubs for decades, is trying to do what's right, but also trying to do what you can when the threat of a Super League has always been hanging over the situation. It's about what the clubs who have the influence within the ECA do they want this Champions League revenue to feed the ecosystem, to make the clubs at the bottom healthier to feed down to the pyramid for a healthier system? Or is it about a cash grab to pay their salary bills, to pay their debts?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's the €100 million question. I mean, the other thing is this coefficient funding model, which was brought in 2018, I think that's right, which I think gives 30% of the market pool now basically is allocated on a club's 10-year performance in Europe. So, those clubs that have achieved success get more. Um, there is certainly some feeling in the ECA that should either be sort of downgraded or scrapped and altogether. But is that a dangerous move to do that?
I think that coefficient funding was just a real heist by a certain group of the wealthiest clubs in 2016. This was approved at a time when UEFA didn't have a president, between Platini and Ceferin. But if you look at that coefficient table now and where the money goes, you'd think of Liverpool as a successful club, which would probably do well in that coefficient table. But they're surprisingly low down on it because Klopp's first full season, 2016-17, Liverpool weren't in Europe. And it takes a long time to build your place back up in that coefficient table, so that year on year, Liverpool are already getting 8-10 million euros less than Real Madrid, who are just locked in at the top. It's very, very difficult to improve your position in that 10-year table. And it's just a built-in advantage to Madrid, Barcelona, Bayern, Juventus, year after year after year.
But, looking at it, I guess from their point of view, the European football has never been a level playing field as well. The idea that it's just Champions League or European income that feathers the nest of these big clubs probably isn't correct. You look at domestic television rights. The Premier League is, as we've said many times, is now in an absolute league of its own. The income is so much more significant than any of the other domestic leagues where these so-called big clubs are playing in. You could kind of see the pressure on them to try and keep up with the Premier League. So, when you look at it in the round, it's how else can they keep up with the Premier League? Because if this doesn't happen, I'm not saying this is a good thing to give these big clubs more money. I'm just thinking from a broader sense of competitive balance. We keep saying that, or interesting games. Let's get rid of the word competitive. We just want to watch games where one team might be able to beat the other one, right? Now, if this doesn't happen, the Premier League is so far ahead of the others. We might just see a procession of English clubs winning European competitions as well, because as we've seen, success almost always is defined by how much money you can spend on players, be it salaries or transfer fees.
On the other hand, football's had these sort of cycles, isn't it? I mean, you could say that about Italy in the 1990s, for example, Spain in the first decade of the century. So I suppose there's a thing is, do you mess with it too much, or do you just accept that one country is going to have dominance for a bit of time, then things will change? Or is the fact that actually if you don't do anything, the English clubs are going to dominate in perpetuity?
The English clubs could dominate, but at least we're seeing that in England there is, it's a big six. Manchester United and Arsenal are outside of the Champions League. There is and you can imagine that Wolves have been close, West Ham have been close to breaking in. Newcastle maybe will soon. There is turnover in who are the 4 Champions League clubs. There is the potential for turnover in England. That's not really happening in Spain at all. Atlanta broke in a little while in Italy, but the Premier League is genuinely competitive. I think at that level. But clearly the Premier League, his own domestic broadcast revenues are such a massive advantage that yes, I will concede that it's looked upon jealously by the rest of Europe with good reason.
I mean, the stats kind of bear it out a bit. I found something quite striking with the transfer window this year. The team that spent the third most on players across Europe is newly promoted Nottingham Forest. I think that in itself is remarkable, and that is not through owner funding. I don't think that is. You could maybe describe it as reckless. It's spending all of the money that they're likely to get from just being in the Premier League. Now, a newly promoted team in Serie A, for example, would earn. I would guess 1/5 of the income Nottingham Forest will have just from being in the Premier League. So only Chelsea and the trolley dash Barcelona have embarked on by selling, the family China. It's been more than the Nottingham Forest, and this trend, I think, is interesting. It's here for a long time, as far as I'm concerned. Whether I'm not saying it's good or bad, maybe the Premier League will be the world's league, and the others will be feeding it. I mean, who knows?
What makes me a little bit sad as a sort of purist nostalgic, who grew up watching European football, where Anderlecht or were as big a club as anyone else. You want to see those kinds of clubs have a chance to succeed, but if you're a mid-table champion and you break through, can you keep your players? Is the promise of the Champions League revenue you could get enough that you can have a long-term investment plan, or is it a quick sale? Is your squad picked over by the truly wealthy clubs, and you don't have a chance to build organically? I mean, the system says, "Oh, the dream is open to anyone. You can build organically," but realistically, a club that made a breakthrough with a good core of players. Maybe Ajax 2019 is the best example. They all left very quickly. They didn't build. I mean, to Ajax's credit that they've come back so strongly since. But it's the way the system is. That Ajax team breaks through in 2019 and it's picked over immediately. And then they have to go through another phase to rebuild. I think that's very sad. And maybe if Ajax had the promise of more revenue instantly for one season in the Champions League, they could make a long-term plan to retain that squad.
Here's my chat with Aki Realati about various financial issues. Interesting stuff too.
Everybody knows that the Champions League is driving the value and mainly money coming from the big markets. But when we talk about competitive balance, we have to be very careful because it's not the European competitions that are killing the competitive balance. It's the domestic TV rights of the biggest 5 leagues. So if we really want to talk about competitive balance, then we would have to discuss, which I think would be a really interesting discussion, that should the 5 top leagues also give solidarity for their domestic broadcasting deals, because that's also, that's where the competitive imbalance is created, is the domestic TV rights of the 5 biggest leagues. So that is a much more interesting question, which I think you journalists should sometimes raise up. So when I look at the system here, it feeds to all, and everybody is involved, all the countries, and that's not the root cause of competitive balance. It's not the European games, it's the domestic TV rights. So obviously that's something that has to be looked at. Obviously we have to look for the welfare for the whole system as such. Last cycle there was a remarkable development for that, thanks to ECA, for the solidarity, especially from the gapped 5 top leagues to the on the benefit for the 50 others, which means that all of them will get pretty much double than they did last year. Then I think there are elements, and this is a personal opinion, this is not now I'm not talking on behalf of ECA, that we have to also look what is the pillars within the different one. This doesn't make the huge difference, and these are not the root cause for competitive balance. But I think it's always important to review where the market pools coefficients are as important than, for example, winning it on a pitch.
This is the penultimate year of the existing 32-team format for the Champions League. How do you think the new sort of 36-team Swiss model, do you think it's going to be an exciting change?
I think it's a fantastic change. I was, from the first minute, very much in favor of it, and I was very happy that it got introduced. It gives more. I think it gives more excitement until the end. It gives probably better, games, and it's a new exciting format. And if you look now, if you look even the first sales of TV rights, like in the US, it's 150% up, and it's just great reception from not just from the TV market but from the fans, that it gives much more exciting one table. I think it's a good improvement. Overall, I think I'm the CEO of one of the smallest clubs who play in the group phases, and for me, both the system that is more inclusive, plus the distribution has in the last 6 years done way better than it was ever before. So I really have to thank UEFA for looking for the whole system, not just the top flight league benefits.
So interesting, this idea that one controversial idea for some people that he has is that it's not just the Champions League solidarity rights that should be shared out amongst sort of European football, but also that why not the Premier League's international TV rights. For example, he was saying to me, if Finland pays a sum of money for the international TV rights, which is much more than they pay for the local Finnish leagues rights, shouldn't the Premier League give a percentage of that as solidarity back to the country from which that territory which pays it? But I mean,
that's a UEFA and ECA talking point from 2019, when we started this round of Champions League reform talks, at the time when that's locking in 24 teams year on year. That was the pushback on the European leagues as resistance to that ECA UEFA plan. The original plan for changing the Champions League format was, why don't your league members pay more in solidarity?
So it's not just those guys in Europe. I remember talking to Amadou Pinnick, the former outgoing president of the Nigerian Football Federation, and he was talking about this as well, but from a different standpoint. He was saying, we send all of our gifted young players to your continent, to your country. You then bank all this money off the back of this talent we've reared. Can we get, so everyone wants a bit of a slice of the Premier League's massive income, but the reality is it ain't going to happen, is it? I mean, maybe the Premier League will do the odd bits of development, but it's almost a moot conversation. Graham, something you put on Twitter the other day was really interesting, and Martin, where you are is kind of the point there. You are there in Istanbul for the launch of the Champions League draw. I think you were there at the draw on Thursday, and there isn't a team from Turkey. Graham, that graphic you put up, there isn't a team from the East at all, is there, this year?
The map of the dots on the map of the 32 teams is just so loaded towards the west, and even the Eastern European teams from the old Eastern European countries that are there, like Victoria Pilsen and Dinamo Zagreb, still seem to be neighboring Western Europe. But yeah, the countries like Bulgaria, Azerbaijan, that have been had Champions League teams in recent years, they're just nowhere to be seen this year. And Greece and Turkey, a big gap that just leaves Maccabi Haifa isolated in about 2,000 kilometers of empty space, and there they are. But 10 years ago, 15 years ago, we would see Olympiacos and Fenerbahce and Galatasaray year after year in the Champions League. They were there representing those countries. Maybe we thought their Champions League money then distorted their domestic league. Now in Turkey, we see more turnover. It seems to be more competitive. Başakşehir had a year. Trabzonspor were in there this year. But maybe if you win only 1 year of your domestic league, you don't have a chance to build that foundation to be a successful team. And then you find you're knocked out in the qualifying rounds. You haven't even got a team in the Champions League group stage. So, what's better, having one team or two teams dominate and be in the Champions League every year, but you have a competitive domestic league, and then they're not strong enough to get into the Champions League group stage the next year. And we have a hugely stacked Western European Champions League group stage this year.
Someone who's been out here in Istanbul is Nasser Al-Khelaifi, chairman of the ECA, president of Paris Saint-Germain, UEFA executive committee member, head of beIN Sport, and Tariq, I think you've sort of nettled him somewhat this week by pointing out all these various roles and the fact that he possibly has got a bit of an easy ride from UEFA.
Yeah, well, just committed a bit of journalism, and all hell seems to have broken loose, and you kind of succinctly placed him in those roles, and that was the point of the story, really. That this man with the multiple hats, particularly the being one, funnily enough, because he's, I think, currently or in previous years, UEFA's biggest customer. As being Sports, this Qatari broadcaster, it has spent billions on buying rights from UEFA and other leagues. So it's weird that your customer is sat there on your board, and then you wonder how you treat these people who are so close to you. So something that I kind of focused on, there was an incident at the Real Madrid uh, PSG Champions League game in March. It was a very high stakes game, round of 16, and there was a lot of tension around that game. Of course, Nasser Al-Khelaifi emerged as a heroic figure after Super League, saying PSG had no part in it, helped UEFA crush it, and Real Madrid were the people pushing this. So there was a lot at stake. PSG were pretty much coasting to victory. They were winning for, I think, 70 of the three quarters of the 2 game series there, and then thanks to Karim and Benzema, Real Madrid knock PSG out, and then all hell breaks loose. Nasser Al Khelaifi, according to the referee, stormed into the referee's room, broke a linesman's flag, according to the referee's report. And these things happen. It's a very passionate game, and normally UEFA investigates these things, and then after a couple of weeks we get a decision. It would have been maybe a 1 game ban or something like that. But in Nasser's case, it was months. It dragged on, and it was on a Friday night in June after the season was finished, where it was announced what had happened. There was no mention of Nasser Al Khelaifi. His then former assistant Leonardo got a 1 match ban, had been fired by PSG, and I found it very strange that this wasn't normal. And then put against all these hats he has, I felt maybe there's some issues of conflict of interest, or at least the idea of it. Anyway, so that was the story. Graham, you've asked questions about this before, haven't you?
Well, the day that that Nasser joined the UEFA Executive Committee, it was the UEFA Congress in Rome, 2019. Also, the day that Alexander Chefrin was re-elected president. And in the press conference that day, he was asked about the conflicts of interest. A very broadly focused question about the conflicts of interest of having Nasser on the UEFA Executive Committee. And he answered in a very narrowly focused way, saying, well, the Exco doesn't discuss TV rights, so he won't be involved in any broadcast deals that we may do with beIN. But that answer conveniently ignored the fact that, well, there were conflicts of interest potential that we could see then in relation to financial fair play cases, the leadership structure of the ECA, and as we've seen, a disciplinary case where, we only have circumstantial evidence looking from the outside, but it looked for all the world like special favor, special treatment for the PSG president.
So there were 2 things that struck me in the reporting. One, I spoke to Alex Phillips, who was at UEFA for 17 years. It's head of compliance was his last job in 2019, and he told me that he'd actually raised this point about conflicts of interest and Nasser's appointment to the board inside UEFA, and he was ignored, and that struck me as being a very significant thing to say publicly. And he also said that UEFA has politicized this disciplinary function. Again, a really strong point for someone who would be an insider to say. And that kind of is worrying. And it kind of tells you perhaps what one suspects, that football is a club, and these relationships, it's sort of, directed by relationships, and some of these relationships are more important. So you kind of smooth things over. And I guess if you're a small or middle-sized club, or one of the outsiders, it almost feels like it's not a level playing field.
Because there are conflicts of interest in having like somebody from the European leagues on the UEFA Exco, some ECA members on the Exco as well. It's sort of bound to arise. So I think that's when you're sort of duty bound to make absolutely sure that there is no special favours. But it just like undermines the authority of the whole organisation.
Yeah, I mean, just to his credit as well, none of this is any of these stories were like, they're never personal, and that's where this stuff gets a bit funny for me. Is like if you meet Nasser Al-Khelaifi, he's a very nice guy. So he comes across very well, charming, talks to people, etc., etc. So the weird thing is, whenever these kind of stories get written, everyone says, "Oh, it's an attack on this person or this club," but we're talking about a systemic issue here. It's a problem with the system, and it is, I guess, our job to point out. And I must say, having written it and published it, we were told that we would have no more access to PSG or be in, and no interview requests from them. And as I think that's a shame. I'll probably leave it at that from that point of view, because it's a weird way of working.
It's also strange. It's kind of a Streisand effect working in this case, because had there been a disciplinary case, it wouldn't have been a big sanction. Maybe it had to sit out one game from the stands, but you could have argued, okay, it was a heat of the moment thing. Who among us hasn't lost our cool in the wrong situation? But the way it's been handled shines a light on the governance processes at UEFA, which is an institutional problem going forward, draws more attention to the case. And at a time when they're fighting clubs in the European Court of Justice, and the next dispute with FIFA is just around the corner, why would you allow this speculation about the integrity of your processes to spread like this? It's just curious.
But talking of FIFA there, Graham, did you notice who was watching the boxing in Saudi Arabia at the weekend alongside Mohammed bin Salman, the Crown Prince?
There was quite the sports politics going on at that boxing game. It wasn't just the FIFA president, and there was the president of swimming, who has a main Olympic sport, who has other ambitions for leadership roles within the wider Olympic family. It was really quite the place to be watching the heavyweight fights at the weekend.
There was also Gianni's deputy, Matthias Grafström, was there, and maybe it was the way the picture was taken. He looked so forlorn and a little bit sad. Maybe it was just the way because it was such a great fight. I hope he once the kind of action got going, he got more revved up. But Matthias and Gianni have been on their tours and have been to Saudi Arabia numerous times. Martyn, Graham, there was then a piece by someone Martyn talked to for a piece in the Sunday Times a couple of weeks ago about Saudi Arabia. James Dorsey, this academic based in Singapore, he speculated around the same time as that fight, actually, that Saudi Arabia was mulling another bid or another try at trying to get a group together to host the 2034 World Cup. Do you think that's the plan here? That's the relationship?
Well, I think since then we've had the Saudi sports minister saying that hosting the Olympics is their ultimate ambition, and then there was reports came out talking about a sort of 3-continent bid. I think, Graham, is that right?
Yes, Saudi Arabia from Asia, Egypt from Africa, and Greece and Turkey from Europe, which is very creative, a bit unusual. I'm not exactly sure what would be the incentive for UEFA to sign off on that kind of project. But anything seems possible for the future, and it seems to be you need to have some sort of peacemaking political function to get initial attention. But when for 2030, especially when there is a solid European bid from Spain, Portugal, a very emotional pull of going back to South America for the Centenary World Cup, why this Saudi Arabia anchored case for 2030 should force its way into the picture. I think, okay, maybe have a discussion for 2034, but surely not for 2030.
I think the why, Graham, is an easy one, isn't it? I mean, it's very rich, and we can just stop there. But the idea that Saudi's focused on the Olympics, Martyn, reminds me of many years ago. Actually, when I first started covering this beat, one of the first events I had to cover was something called Sport Accord, and it was in Athens in 2008. And there was another country that said its primary focus was hosting the Olympic Games, not the Football World Cup. and we'll be going there in November and December for the World Cup. So I guess, there is a tried and trusted path here.
Yeah, Qatar tried, didn't they? A couple of Olympic bids, and they never actually got to the stage where they were allowed to have a vote. I think the executive board of the IOC blocked that, basically because of the timing. They were trying to push it into October because of the temperature, and the IOC wasn't having that. But can you honestly imagine another Winter World Cup, the European leagues accepting that they're going to be disrupted again?
I can imagine the European leagues not accepting it, but I can imagine that someone will try. I mean, you could argue Australia would be very interested if there was an opportunity for that. But I think you've touched on this on the pod in the past. The way that climate change is going and the temperatures in most of your potential hosts in June, July, that if this World Cup in November, December is good and the players enjoy it and say they feel fresh, then I think, we will have bidding in the future for a November, December.
Yeah,
World
I
Cup.
also think we're in this midst of this big calendar debate. Again, it sounds quite prosaic and boring, but it's very, very important. Where what Arsene Wenger and FIFA are trying to reformulate the global football calendar, and for me, there's some bits of it and some of Arsene Wenger's ideas that aren't bad and should be looked at. One of those is this shaping the calendar in a way that you could host a World Cup in October and in the summer because of the way they're going to shape the international breaks. I don't know if it will happen. I think, as you said, a lot of pushback from clubs, European clubs, because there's so much television money at stake around the winter period. But being devil's advocate here, FIFA's role, it's not Europe's game, and you couldn't. The idea that because the weather's not good at a certain time of year, the tournament can only be played then seems a little unfair if you really think about it and think, well, others want to host these tournaments, they should be given the right. But football maybe this is the push and pull, guys, isn't it? Everyone's fighting for their slice.
Yeah, I mean, interestingly, the Turkish FA people I spoke to are sort of unaware of anything about being connected with a World Cup bid, and I think the Greeks the same. This is very much a sort of government level contact, I think. The Turkish FA are very much focused on their Euros bid. They're going to go for 2028 and 2032. There's sort of some considerable pressure, I think, from UEFA for them to step aside from 2028, leave it for the British and Irish to have a sort of commercially successful event there. But they say they're not going to do that. Full steam ahead for 2028. Interesting if this is a sort of political move that they can sort of exert some pressure on UEFA so that they can almost be guaranteed 2032, because Italy are the other main bidders for that, and they have huge infrastructure challenges, I think.
I feel like those infrastructure challenges could be partly solved by hosting Euro 2032, and then you start having a national project to break through the infamous red tape and bureaucracy and construction projects in Italy. But Italia 90 was the catalyst for a generation of stadium upgrades. That's a long time ago now. They need another round of stadiums. Not owning your own modern football stadium is one reason why the Serie A clubs have maybe fallen behind in revenue earning, behind the English clubs for sure. So I think, within UEFA, I'm sure they would love to have Italy hosting again, and Italy would like to push forward some stadium projects. But I feel like Turkey hosting the Euro is surely something that's going to happen in our lifetime. It seems to be, Turkey bidding for it, coming so close, or passing up good opportunities, something we've lived through for year after year in our careers. How many of those bids have we written about? It has to happen sometime.
Almost feels
surely.
mean.
Yeah, this is the 6th and 7th time tournament that they're trying to get. One other Saudi-related issue which has come up this week: golf. We've talked about golf quite a lot, but and Live Golf, the Saudi-funded breakaway competition. There's been quite a significant development this week.
Yeah, we've been following this quite closely. Rob and I went to the first event in St Albans, the Saudi series, and there's been it's described as a hostile takeover of golf. The PGA Tour has launched legal proceedings or defending itself from legal proceedings after banning the kind of breakaway golfers. But we've been waiting for what it will actually do practically in response. And this week we got it. It started actually with a flight that Tiger Woods took to Delaware. He had Ricky Fowler with him, and these 22 golfers had a meeting. It's something quite rare, actually, the closed meeting, to make a plan for the future of golf. And this week we've seen the first signs of that, and some of it looks very much like Live Golf. If I'm honest, is going to be bigger purses, $20 million purses. That seems very similar to Live Golf. There's going to be 500,000 upfront guarantees. The first time PGA Tour's ever paid any guarantees. They're going to be giving them travel budgets. All these things that kind of seem similar in a way to what Live Golf has done. And the other things, Jay Monahan, the PGA Tour commissioner, a few months ago, he said the one thing we can't compete with Saudi on is money, and we won't be able to match them with money. And to me, it seems that's exactly what they've done: increased purses, guaranteed funding, as I said, and this new event. Graham, have you heard about this new event, stadium event?
I've been reading about it. I mean, I'm not an avid follower of golf, but I was curious enough to see what it is, and it's stunningly different as a proposition. So, virtual reality shots off the tee, live action, sort of pitching and putting, I suppose, for the sort of the amateur fan like me. But it's contained within a stadium. It brings fans closer to the action. It's genuinely different, which in a way, I mean, if you're not an avid watcher of golf like me, the Live proposition is not actually different enough to be noticeable. It's still 18 holes, taking a few hours going around the same course, whereas this Tiger Rory proposition is genuinely different. And if they're proposing to play in this, Monday night slot when it's, the NFL is not occupying with Monday night football, it's not competing with your traditional 4-day weekend event. It's interesting. I mean, with these types of competitions, always the risk of you attract new audiences by annoying your core fan base. But I have to say the details were more grabbing than the Live proposition.
Yeah, Graham, all very interesting, but also I think what was very clear, Jay Monahan, the PGA Tour commissioner, he basically said that those guys who've gone and taken that money have gone. So whatever happens, these new formats, this player impact program as well, which is going to give tens of millions of dollars to stars like Woods and McIlroy, that is not for them. There is no way back for these guys. He kind of said, we don't want their money and we don't want their players. So this fissure we've seen, this break from golf, feels permanent for now. And I think that's going to be fascinating in years to come. If those players, Dustin Johnson, Phil Mickelson, some big names, Bryce DeChambeau, they're not coming back. And I wonder what golf's going to look like in 2-3 years, even with these changes.
Just to go back to talking about Saudi Olympic bids, Graham, what's your view on the whole 2036 Olympics, where that's going?
Well, we talked earlier about Doha never being able to get on the slate in recent years, but I think that was partly because NBC had said to the IOC it must happen in this slot in July, August. If Saudi or Qatar was to have a better chance, then that needs to change. The NBC TV contract with the IOC runs through Brisbane in 2032, I think. So there is scope to do something different in the calendar in 2036. But to me, it's a little bit curious that the IOC has lived through, a problematic decade, or a decade of problematic Olympics with, Russian doping, bribery and vote buying in the bidding, and that's been changed. The pandemic, and really what ended up being quite a joyless Olympics for us to cover in Beijing this year. But the IOC, to its credit, has created this decade ahead of clear blue water, back to the traditional hosts: France, Italy, America, Australia. And okay, so the next big decision they've got is for 2036. Now, the IOC, they can't stop people saying we want to bid for this, but who's coming forward with the Saudis saying they want to do it? Germany, after finishing hosting successful multi-sport European Championships also last weekend, said, well, maybe we want to do it. It's like, oh, what? The centenary of the Nazi Olympics? Really? Is that the road we want to go down? If they'd have said, okay, but we're only thinking of 2040, well, perhaps. But then again, the IOC president a few weeks ago visiting, and he's not the only one to visit, Viktor Orban in Budapest, which at the moment, when Hungary looks like the closest ally of Russia during the war within the European Union, the IOC has gone through its difficult decade, created a calm decade ahead, and the options for 2036 at the moment are looking less than ideal. Maybe this is where India steps in to the road, but the 2036 Olympics bidding's taking curious turns at the moment.
Yeah, the IOC session next year is in Mumbai, I think. I wonder if that India option is sort of building a bit of momentum. You got Olympics in India, good for you, Tariq?
Well, I just think more broadly, like the Olympics is always, I say more than the Football World Cup in a way. It's such a kind of power projection event for countries, and Graham's listed those, and we talk about India, and if you look a little bit closely at what's happening in India right now, never before since India became a democracy in 1947 have we seen as much nationalist rhetoric as we have in India right now with the current Modi government, the BJP there. When you kind of place the current Indian political scene next to the ones that Graham's just described, it makes perfect sense. But for me, would also create some of the same worries about what it would be used for. By like the Olympics for me is kind of linked to regimes writ large more than anything else. What do you think? Do you China, Graham? You mentioned them. Is that the point of the Olympics now?
It's certainly become that, because if you're united behind that kind of project, then it unlocks the billions of dollars you need to make it happen, and all the coordination at all levels of government you need to make a successful Olympics. It's interesting because under Thomas Bach, the IOC has reshaped bidding and the process of awarding Olympics, which is it's not really a vote anymore. It's all done by the administration. They have it in their gift, so it'll be interesting to see which of these interested parties for 2036 the IOC encourages. The IOC hasn't publicly said they are interested in the Saudis or a German centenary bid. And I checked whether, these sports leaders who go to, there's a whole number of sports leaders who've gone to Saudi Arabia in the last year or two, photographed meeting with Mohammed bin Salman. Not so sure that Thomas Bach has met him, or are there any whether Thomas Bach's not really aligned with MBS. I don't think we've seen any official encouragement from the IOC for a Saudi bid, but that can change. But also, Thomas Bach's 12 years as IOC president is coming to an end soon, and should he be leading the decision for the 2036, which might be the biggest decision that his successor in 2025 should be taking to make their mark. So maybe we're just going to have a sort of a phony war for the next 3 years on who could be the 2036 host. But India, clearly, that session next May in Mumbai, in a venue owned by the billionaire Ambani family, who's Mrs. Ambani is an IOC member. It's clearly set up as a showcase for India's Olympic ambitions.
And a big day for Ukrainian football this week, with the return of football there, Graham.
Yeah, whatever your political views, as a football fan, it's incredibly heartwarming to see the Ukraine Premier League, which completely stopped, obviously, by the war last season. They kicked off on Tuesday, which was National Flag Day. There were more games on Wednesday, Independence Day, in empty stadiums. But the first game, Shakhtar against Metalist 1925, in the Olympic Stadium in Kiev, where we've been for some great, the biggest games in European football in recent years. And there they were back. In some games, the players had to go off into the bomb shelters. I think one game took 4 hours to complete because of the air raids sirens that went off. But Ukrainian football is back, and there's the prospect of the Ukraine Classico coming to London later this year.
No fans there. You said quite rightly, given the unsafe environment, and God, the idea of running out on a football field with the threat of an air raid as well. I can only dread to think what it must be like for the players. But there is that sense that they're doing it for the nation, and it's an important part of the government's efforts to keep the population feeling positive, and also to show Ukraine to the world. There were media there, though, from around the world. There were officials, broadcasters were allowed as well. I was surprised that there were no senior officials from football, though. FIFA has talked about this Ukraine issue at some length. UEFA too. They have got these Ukrainian flags, I think, and solidarity flags. The Women's Euros I noticed this summer, but didn't seem like there was anyone there. Is that right?
Well, I certainly didn't see any of that presence. I mean, maybe there's football politicians are like this, probably scared of doing anything which might seem that they're sort of taking sides against Vladimir Putin, perhaps. I don't know. But that's we are talking about, as Rob has mentioned before in previous pods, Gianni Infantino, who's just got given a medal by Vladimir Putin, so maybe he last things he wants to do is to seem to be taking sides.
Well, football has taken a side by UEFA and FIFA banning all Russian teams from its international competitions and winning an appeal at CAS to uphold that. So they kind of have taken sides. And if it was a very low-profile visit, if they were there in Kiev to endorse these games. But yeah, it feels like this is something that football could have shown solidarity with Ukraine for.
Right, guys. Great to catch up.